Hi, I'm Femi. Okay, you're watching the stream. On today's show, COVID-19 pandemic and homelessness in America, one of the richest countries in the world. Now, I am sure that wherever you're watching in the world, you have your own stories and your own experiences about homelessness and COVID-19. You know what to do. If you're on YouTube, jump into the chat and you too can be part of the conversation. I'm going to say hello to this amazing panel, and they're going to introduce themselves to you. Dr. Cashel, great to have you. Tell everybody who you are.
Nice to be here. My name is Margot Cushel, and I'm a physician and researcher at University of California, San Francisco, where I have devoted my career to trying to recognize that housing is the best medicine. And I, at UCSF, direct the UCSF Center for Vulnerable Populations.
Margot, great to have you. Mark with an H. We have two Marks today. Doubly lucky. Mark with an H. Tell everybody who you are and what the H stands for.
I'm Mark Horvath, and I'm the founder of Invisible People. 25 years ago, I lived homeless on the streets of Los Angeles, and now I run a nonprofit called Invisible People, where we focus on education, journalism, and advocacy to help end homelessness.
We are going to see some of that incredible work in today's program.
I forgot to dare. And this is my last COVID hair live stream. I'm getting it chopped tomorrow.
Thank you. We feel so lucky. Thank you for saving the long hair for us. And
she made me do it.
Okay, this show is going to be trouble. We also have Mark with a D. Mark with a D. Tell everybody what the D stands for. Welcome to the stream.
Thanks for having me. My name is Mark Jones. I am a psychiatric anthropologist, and I've spent the last 10 years really focused on the intersection of policy and anti-racism, trying to get the United States to finally not be racist. So I sleep real well.
Great. Great to have you, everybody. All right, let me start with something that I remember seeing, 3 months ago. So this is a headline here in the Guardian newspaper. So many newspapers picked it up. Las Vegas parking lot turned into homeless shelter with social distancing markers. You can see that this is an old headline, but this was the image that truly, truly shocked me. Look at this. Is this the way to treat people during a global pandemic? I was stunned, Margot. What are you seeing? Was this a solution for social distancing? It's crazy.
I mean, I think it's a really damning statement of where the United States is with homelessness right now. The COVID pandemic hasn't changed anything, but it has really shown us and exploited the fault lines in our community, the way that racism shows up in everything that we do. COVID has really been a crisis upon a crisis. It created this massive health crisis that placed people who are homeless at extremely high risk because they're living in crowded places. They don't have access to hygiene. We've seen terrible outbreaks in shelters. And I think that response of placing people outside and painting a line 6 feet apart just shows how far we have to go as so many people have suffered from this pandemic.
Mark D., I see you nodding. Articulate the nod. Go ahead.
I mean, like Margot's right, it's embarrassing, right? Like we as a nation should be embarrassed by how we have historically interacted with folks experiencing homelessness. This should be, frankly, the final nail in the coffin with regard to seeing very clearly that what we do is unconscionable. And to Margaret's point about racism, right, I think that it's really important to note that the majority of people experiencing homelessness in this nation are Black and brown folks. And that, frankly, the reason why we have been able to get away with the treatment that we have is because of that, right? It is the fusion of America's classism and racism that simultaneously allows us to say to people, you don't exist, and what you need doesn't matter.
Let's talk practicalities, Mark H. You head up a project called Invisible People. You spend a lot of time with people on the streets. You talk to them. You say, tell me your story. What happened to you? Very direct.
I first want to address the Las Vegas photo because that article and those photos came out, it was shocking and there was a lot of uproar about it, and there should be. But that's how Las Vegas has treated homelessness far before COVID-19. The city uses what a courtyard model where people are sleeping on a sidewalk in a courtyard before COVID-19 came about. So yeah, everybody's screaming about this, but we've been treating homelessness like that for decades.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, we've always been this bad, right? Like, we've never actually had an actual humanitarian, dignity-centered approach to homelessness. And so I think that what, is remarkable is how little has changed, to Mark's point, right? Like, we see these sort of quote unquote before and after, but it's just the same before.
Yes, as you're speaking, I just want to pull back up this picture, because as you're speaking, it becomes so clear that every single one of those bundles, these are human beings, these are people. Margot, what did you want to say? Go ahead.
I think, as Mark and Mark were saying, that, the pandemic really has just amplified the problems that we've had with homelessness. It hasn't actually changed things. It's increased the danger dramatically, but the underlying problems have been there for a long time. I think a lot of people, with the enormous racial disparities that we're seeing in who lives and who dies with COVID, have suddenly become awakened to what we've always known and has always been true in this country. I mean, maybe what's different here is the painted lines, but unfortunately the overall reality isn't that different from what we've lived with in the United States for far too long.
It's extraordinary that this is some news to some people who live in communities where there are homeless people, but they're, to your point, Mark H., invisible people. I want to show a page from your website of Invisible People, the stories of homeless people from around the world, not just from the US. And you spoke to Brent not too long ago. Brent is a law clerk and he is living on the streets right now. He's looking for work right now. And he explained to you how keen he was not to be homeless and also the impact of COVID-19. Let's have a listen to Brent.
I really like a place to lock up my stuff, take a shower, and just a little piece of the world to close the door on so that people can't go through your stuff.
Yeah. And COVID, you were telling me earlier, the COVID coronavirus, it closed all the bathrooms. You guys had no place to clean up or to go.
It's hard to go to the bathroom out here as it is, but everybody has now shut the bathrooms down at all the fast food restaurants is really where you go, to the supermarkets or service stations, and they're always closed. Even before COVID, they were always either under repair, not working, or whatever. It's very difficult to go to the restroom. You almost have to go onto a construction site and use one of those porta potties.
Mark H., real practical difficulties right there.
Yeah. I remember about a month or 2 months ago, we had a toilet paper shortage. So now imagine you're homeless and you can't get toilet paper, nor can you get access to a bathroom. And where it is a real crisis is water. And hygiene. I mean, with COVID, you have to wash your hands, but also homeless people use drinking water that they get from public bathrooms, and you need water to live. I think there's something interesting also about Brent's story, that in Los Angeles, a city, right now the CDC has come out with guidelines that are against homeless suites. So in Los Angeles, advocates, and thank God for that they were able to push this, have really slowed down the sweeps. So now Brent, in that story, if you watch the whole video, Brent can stay in one place. They don't have to move every day. They don't have the threat of police every day. But to be perfectly clear, Los Angeles, Denver, and many cities, even though it's against CDC guidelines, are still sweeping homeless camps.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and this is
yeah, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say, like this is, I think why folks in the housing and homelessness sector actually do have to have a position on policing and police interactions, right? Again, if we own the fact that the majority of folks experiencing homelessness in the U.S. are folks of color, like police interactions are not a neutral thing, right? Like the police violence and the brutality that has been documented in the demonstrations has been, sort of really lifted to the fore of the conversation the last couple of weeks, is stuff that we have seen folks experiencing homelessness undergo for years. There are tons of headlines, right, of police interacting with folks experiencing homelessness and the brutality that comes out of that. And so I think that, like, we actually, again, have to be really clear that racism is at the core of this. And, right, like, I want to say really, really candidly, clearly, the police budgets, right, that comprise like 30 to 50% of municipal budgets, that's the money that could house people. And I'm sick of having conversations with mayors, my own mayor, right, Mayor Ginther in Columbus. I'm sick of these conversations of, like, we don't have the money to provide the thing. We don't have the money to do the right thing. When 50% of your budget, I mean, we have 6 helicopters in Columbus, Ohio. Columbus, Ohio. Why do we need 6 helicopters?
In Los Angeles, last year, $30 million was spent on homeless sweeps, 40 sweeps a day. Now, I get an email every day from Los Angeles advocates trying to predict and let other advocates and people that care know about the sweeps. Sweeps are still happening. $30 million a year. They're building bridge shelters at $2 million. Those sweeps, if you took the budget away from sweeps, you could build 15 shelters at the money that they're spending. It makes no sense to me, but that's the response to homelessness. And you wonder why it grows?
Yes, conversation happening on YouTube I want to share with you. So Amit Kumar, 1946, Amit says, we can't depend on the government for all of this. We should help the homeless at an individual level. Margot.
I mean, look, I think that speaking for the United States, to say the government hasn't had a role in this on sort of the dispossession for Black and brown people of their ability to buy housing, sort of buy into the quote unquote American dream, has been a major contributor to, and by the way, that was sanctioned by the government for many years, major contributor to the enormous wealth gaps that we see. And that is an enormous cause of homelessness. The lack of affordable housing doesn't just support itself. Affordable housing needs to be supported by the government. If we get, come to things and think that magically the market is going to fix this, you wind up seeing what we see in the United States. The numbers don't pencil out. We have a minimum wage that hasn't kept up with the cost of living. We have had a dramatic disinvestment in housing supports. In most parts of the world, housing is something that is supported by governments, and we don't really have that to the extent that we need that. So I guess I would counter that the market it has failed here, that, the living wage in the Bay Area where I live right now is that what we call the housing wage, where people could actually afford very modest housing, would be $40 to $50 an hour. We're fighting like heck to get the minimum wage up to $15 an hour. Something has to give, and that, I think, I'm afraid to say, is going to need to involve federal investment or investment in housing, investment in increase in our minimum wage so that we pay people the job that they do, and the recognition that some people will always and have always needed support. It's just that we have different, we just are in a country where people take this individualized view and don't actually believe. They sort of have this sense that everything is everyone's individual fault when it just really isn't.
I guess I wanted to have a think about this, if I may, because we are talking about an issue that has been an issue in the United States for a very long time, also an issue around the world for a very long time. I am wondering if COVID-19 could change that. I want to have a look at this. This is Anna Liffey on Twitter. Dublin has outperformed even best scenarios for COVID-19 mortality among homeless and drug-using populations. Anna Liffey is a group that looks after people who use drugs and helps them to get out of their drug use. Tony Duffin says 63 homeless people were diagnosed with COVID-19 and there was one death, a fraction of what was predicted in Dublin. We saw that tweet and we were like, Tony, we need to talk to you. This is what he told us a little bit earlier.
what we did in Dublin, what we had in Dublin, was decisive leadership from the state, partnership approach from NGOs, all working together. We had increased housing provision and improved access to drugs like methadone, benzodiazepine, and naloxone. We also had many other supports in place. So combined, all this joint working meant that we were able to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and to reduce drug-related harm.
Okay, this is impressive. Margot, you go first.
I think what we've seen is that this is doable, right? This is not rocket science. There are, in fact, some parts of the country, I think of the state of Connecticut, that very quickly moved a large proportion of the people experiencing homelessness into hotels, which had suddenly become abandoned because of the loss of the tourism industry, and then moved many of those folks into permanent housing. We see in California, not as many, but a large number of people being moved into hotels, and we are doing things like showing that you can move people into housing. This idea that people don't want to be housed has never been true. I do fear, though, that we're facing an oncoming train. We have been successful in moving some people into hotels. We need to get them into permanent housing. But you know, I just read this morning in the Washington Post that an estimated 44% of Latinx folks, renters in the country, and 41% of Black renters in the country are at high risk of eviction. And if we don't act quickly, all of our efforts to move people out of homelessness into housing are going to be overwhelmed by all of the new people who are going to fall into homelessness because of the economic collapse. But this is not rocket science. We know how to keep people safe. We've always known how to house people. We just need to do it.
Yeah.
That idea, Mark H., about moving people into hotels, that was a promise that the mayor of LA made. And it reminds me of a story that's on your Invisible People site. This is Devon here on the Invisible People site. Basically, the mayor said, we have got hotel rooms. We are going to give hotel rooms, our empty hotel rooms, to homeless people. And Devon took him up on his word. And here is Mark H. talking to Devon about what he did. Let's have a look.
I went in and said, I'm a famous musician and I'm in town for a COVID benefit concert. Jed did that, and I had a bodyguard, I had a girlfriend with me, I had a stylist, and we had a group, and we had a woman guarding the door, an Asian woman guarding the police. And as I get in the room, I had my shades on, and I just said, actually, I'm not homeless. I'm not homeless. Wow. Actually, I'm not famous. Yeah. I'm homeless, and I live in Echo Park. Yeah. And I'm not leaving this hotel until Mayor Garcetti commandeers every room in this hotel for homeless people during a state of emergency.
Yeah, and I want to, and I'm glad you transitioned this, because one thing COVID showed, that we can take action as a government and have impact. Prior to COVID, there was not a lot of urgency. All of a sudden, Governor Newsom is buying hotels to house people. That's amazing. So we can. They should have done it before, but we have to keep going. And if you look, advocates in LA have something. If you go to Project Room Key Tracker, they list daily, and in 33 days, there has been no change. Meaning right now there's 3,601 rooms operational. There's 50,000 homeless people. They've only used 4,000 of them, and it's roadblocked. And I understand there's challenges feeding people.
Why? If we have,
I don't know. You would have to ask the city. You would have to. The city and the county has to push this to make it happen. And we know they can, because this actually started. But let's grow it. Let's get it so all the rooms are used, and then the people are placed in the housing.
I want to dip back into YouTube, Mark D, and I want you to take this one. This is Facite non victimarium. If people and governments ignore homelessness during the best of times, to think they'll do something about it during a pandemic is delusional. Mark D, you run with this one.
I have often been called delusional, so that's fine with me. I mean, look, I think that the bottom line is that we, particularly in this country, in the US, but I think frankly globally, are at a crossroads with regard to what is our focus. And to bring it back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, right? Like the US has operated for a long time out of this individualistic and particularistic notion, right? That like, it's just, I got to do it for me and everyone has to do it for themselves. But that's not the only way to live. And I think that one of the things that I think we're starting to see is that, to Mark Horvath's point, right? Like in this country, in this moment, we have to begin to pivot towards a housing justice agenda and an agenda that says like everyone gets housed, full stop. And I think that actually means, right, that we are doing more than ending homelessness when we say that we are about a housing justice agenda. Because to Margot's point, right, like we would then be talking about a livable wage. We were talking about like not having the anxiety, that month-to-month anxiety of like, I can't afford this, right? And if one thing goes wrong, that's it for me. And like we as a society, I think globally, have to begin to say it's unacceptable to continue to architect policy in a way that puts, by some estimates, 60%, right, of the population in a state of precarity almost every month. That actually is what we're talking about, right? We're not necessarily talking about like, oh, we have to end homelessness. We're talking about we have to end economic precarity for people who shouldn't have to live with that anxiety, and that actually encompasses everybody.
Guess there's one more person I want to add their voice to this conversation. That's Peggy Bailey. Peggy Bailey is the Vice President for Housing Policy for the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. This is what she told us earlier.
Whether acting at the federal, state, or local level, policymakers have to prioritize people with the fewest resources. Because whether they're directly impacted by the virus or not, this is the group that will feel the effects of the health and economic crisis for the longest. And we know that for people with low incomes, housing is their biggest bill. So targeting them for rental assistance, whether medium, short, or longer term assistance through a housing voucher makes all the sense in the world. It will help stabilize these families and ensure that they don't fall into homelessness or other bad outcomes.
This sounds like good advice for any time, not just COVID-19 during a global pandemic. Margot, go ahead.
I mean, absolutely. In the United States right now, it's very hard to qualify for housing assistance, but even amongst those who meet that difficult sort of barrier, only 1 in 4 households who qualify get it. It's like a lottery system that you can't even get entered into the lottery. And actually the true cost of fully funding those vouchers is not astronomical. I think it's estimated to be about $41 billion a year to fully fund those vouchers. We spend nearly that on homeless shelters. And frankly, if you go up and down the West Coast, most of the people experiencing homelessness can't even get a bed in a shelter. This is doable, but we just haven't had the policy energy around it. We know that if you give people housing vouchers, they are no longer homeless. And yes, we would need to work on the housing production side and some other things, but this is a doable thing. We just haven't had the energy to do it. And I think, what Mark Doan said was exactly right. I mean, the fact that that homelessness so disproportionately affects Black and brown folks. I mean, the Black community is at 3 to 4-fold increased risk of homelessness across the United States. This speaks a lot to who has political power, who gets to make the decisions, and why we haven't prioritized this.
Okay, so guess I'm in the last 30 seconds of this program. Mark H., you're former TV person, you know what that means. I'm going to show you a few pictures though from visiblepeople.tv, because I want you to see people who do not have homes, people do not have the resources. These are the faces of the people that Mark gets to talk to. Mark, you always ask the people you talk to who are on the streets their 3 wishes. What are your 3 wishes, bearing in mind the context of our conversation? Go ahead.
I'm just gonna go with one right now, and to wrap up is we have to start influencing change. The Black Lives Matter, the defund the police. To me, that's the American dream.
Right.
I had given up that politicians listen to us, but Black Lives Matter and defund police has shown that we can speak up and change policy. So when it comes to housing, when it comes to providing support and solutions to end homelessness, we have to speak up. And if you're in the United States right now, I mean, there's a lot of advocacy. You have to get involved. You have to get involved at the local level and at the national level. Right now, the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rent Stabilization Act, contact your senators. We have to do something, change policy, get housing.
Using his platform while he has the chance. Mark, Margot, the 3 M's, thank you so much for bringing your wisdom to the stream today. Really appreciate you. And thank you, YouTube, for being part of the conversation too. See you next time.